All right, guys, I'm just going to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing 2024 preview and prediction for the Penn State Nittany Lions. Newly revamped coaching staff alongside James Franklin, who's had a superb decade so far with PSU. Andy Nittany spent the past 3 years with Kansas as their offensive coordinator, takes over that role. And then Tom Allen, who had been the head coach since 2017 for Indiana, will be filling Manny Diaz's shoes. Consecutive 10-plus winning seasons. They did lose in the Peach Bowl to Ole Miss. Look at the offensive side of the ball, Nick. I know these numbers are a little bit deceiving, scoring 36 points per game, because they struggled significantly against the tougher opponents. The big reason why, is this team appeared incredibly one-dimensional, and you also had a very young quarterback in Drew Aller, a guy who was a five-star, 6'5", 243, entering his third year in the program. A guy who has great size. He can really uncork the deep ball with ease, can make really good throws on the run. Only had 2 picks on the year, showcasing good ball security. Did a lot of short work, considering the deficiencies of the offensive line and the lack of vertical speed. Really struggled on the road, though. He threw some very good balls versus Maryland. He had a nice fade for a touchdown. Another where he zipped it into a tight window for a score. That was the one road game he did very good in. The other one's not so much. He does have nice arcing balls. Did show plenty of tight window throws through the year, though. His pick versus Indiana was a panicked one. Mainly showed poise during the year. But sometimes the decisions were sporadic. Lack of angles on his throws. Often had batted balls as well. Overall, it was a good year for Drew Aller. And again, obviously, there was plenty of issues with this unit that certainly held him back a good bit, Nick. But I would say for those deficiencies, only 2 interceptions is a good mark. Obviously, they didn't take as many risks on this side of the ball. But what do you make of the upside Aller may provide, or do you think he's just no good like a lot of people do?
Very conservative play calling from the offense last year, and bringing a new offensive coordinator may change that. Drew Aller did not live up to the hype. 60% comp rate, 2,600 yards passing, 25 touchdowns to 2 picks ratio. Obviously, only 2 interceptions is a solid number when you look at it, but they were very conservative, really tried to avoid throwing into tough situations for him. I thought he looked solid back there, but, obviously didn't reach the heights that we were hoping for. Some people were mentioning him potentially as a sleeper for the Heisman last year, trying to get him at good odds, placing bets on that, and that did not come anywhere near to that expectation. But he's a guy that does have some opportunity to grow and develop as a player in the offseason. I think with a revamped offensive coordinator and a change potentially to play calling, a little more aggressive play calling could lead to him being a little more successful. Of course, it could show flaws if those flaws do exist. I like Aller to step up and be a really solid quarterback this year. I think he's going to get a little more keys to the offense, get a little more room to grow, be a little more wild out there potentially, and develop and kind of go for it a little bit further and get some nice big yardage plays and throw to some of his talented wide receivers they have.
And also, Mike Yurcich at times was not the best OC. Play calling certainly didn't do him any favors. He gets axed. Look at the backfield duo they have, though. Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. For Singleton, the size of 6 foot 219 really allows him to attack the inside with confidence. Great speed on the edge. Good strength and toughness. Needs to refine the rest of his game, though. Pass catching, blocking, contact balance. Needs some improvements in that regard. Showcases great leg drive, great patience, and good vision. Allows, we're talking about Katron Allen, that is, is a guy that showcases leg drive, patience, good vision, allows him to pick the right hole. Pretty decisive in the open field, showcases plenty of pop as a physical runner, 5'11", 201. They do a great job of splitting the touches with these two guys, Nick. 172 for Allen, 171 in terms of touches for Singleton. So, this is as dead even as you get. The biggest issue is, Nick, is this is probably going to be the last year for both of these guys. They're probably both going to move on to the NFL, I would assume. A run game that was able to put up 184 per game. Weren't all that good against the tougher opponents, though. Did have a pretty solid outing against Michigan. Nowhere to be found against Ohio State. For the most part, though, it seemed like this ground game really lacked efficiency. You had games against Michigan State where, they were elite. And you had games against, Northwestern where they really struggled. It was a tale of two different sides with this run game that has a lot of potential. They have to do their best to maximize it this season, Nick, if they both do opt to move on.
This is a very strong two-headed monster here. Two guys that are very even, very balanced, and really solid backs. Katron Allen, 902 yards on the ground, 5.2 yards per carry, and 6 scores for him. Singleton, 752, 4.4, and 8 scores for him. Singleton as well, 300 yards receiving out of the backfield and 2 scores on 26 grabs. So he's more of your threat out of the backfield. You can use him a little more dynamic. In general, though, I think these are two really talented running backs. A nice 1-2 punch. If this offensive line holds up and finds them the holes, plus some nice play calling, this could be a really dominant duo in college football.
Obviously, a big reason why they had so much struggles was this receiving core. Health wasn't great, but also the talent is just not all that high-popping. They do add Julian Fleming, a guy from Ohio State who rarely plays inside. Durability has certainly hampered him. but when he's on the field, he showcases, ball skills, route running, speed, 6'2", 210. Very talented player that just never really, provided things in Columbus. Theo Johnson at tight end departs, but they do return another high-end one, Tyler Warren. Pretty good athlete with strong hands, physicality, and yak ability. Has a good route tree as well. Not the best blocker when it comes to production downfield. The 6'5", 260-pound player really provides in that regard. Looking at the other pass catchers, Harrison Wallace has good potential of his speed, but he was hurt all of last year, it seemed. He'll need to stay on field and be consistent in this new offense. Caden Saunders has legit speed that can make an impact, but the ex-top 100 recruit only has 8 receptions in 2 years. Amari Evans has been a good performer in practice, but has yet to make an impact in live action. Third-year man should see better contributions, while Liam Clifford had 13 receptions. Wide receiver group just is not all that strong. They have enough here to win with balance, Nick, but they need numerous different guys to step up and contribute. They also have incoming 5-star tight end Luke Reynolds. And again, I think the best way to describe this receiving core is they have enough here if the run game's putting up 200-plus yards a game, and they can show up and be efficient against these tougher opponents. That's just not been the case, though. They need more out of these guys. The separation's not pretty against tough defensive backs, and even with a strong tight end room, you still need more.
Definitely a weaker wide receiver room. Tyler Warren at tight end, 422 yards receiving, 12.4 yards per grab, 7 touchdowns for him. Harrison Wallace, 228, 12 yards per grab, and 1 score for him. Liam Clifford, 130 yards receiving on 13 grabs. Amari Evans in 4 grabs for 94 yards, 23.5 yards per grab is pretty solid, and 1 touchdown plus Caden Saunders. He had 56 yards on 6 grabs for 1 score. So not a whole lot of proven players in this wide receiver room. They lose Keandre Lambert-Smith, who was really solid for them last year. This is a room that has not been phenomenal the past 2 seasons or so, and I really want to see who's going to step up and be that leader in this wide receiving core.
You look at the offensive line, Drew Shelton takes over left tackle from Olu Fashanu. Was played 350-plus snaps each of the last 2 seasons, mainly on the left side, but did see some time at right tackle as well. Struggled badly, though, in pass pro. He was abused in the bowl game. Vega Iona returns to left guard. Nick Dawkins has been in the program many years, but only started seeing snaps last year. Was good in his brief appearances. He's have to replace a physical run blocker, though. Sal Wormley, 6'3", 330, enters his 3rd year as a starter. Has really struggled in pass blocking, but did progress a good bit this past season. Nolan Rucci, a Wisconsin transfer, figures the slot in at right tackle. Played a few snaps at left tackle in 2 years for them. Starting lineup is iffy, but one thing that's not really talked about with this team is they have some great young 1st and 2nd year players. Anthony Dawka, Alex Mermschmer, Cooper Cousins, Javen Williams, who was a 5-star. All these guys are high-level recruits. Imagine we see a lot of different combos up front this year. A lot of upside for the future. Going into that game against Ohio State, Nick, I had said that they were not going to score 10 points against the Buckeyes. And every single Penn State fan told me I was going to be wrong. They said it was disrespectful. I know some were pointing out a streak of where they scored 30-plus points in numerous games or whatever. And I said, I don't care. It's not going to happen. They scored a garbage time touchdown with about a minute to go to put them at a grand total of 12 points, Nick. I was right, and a big reason for that was not just the separation from the wide receivers I thought would struggle. I just didn't feel they had the strength up front on the O-line. Even with Olu Fashanu, even with Hunter Norzad, those guys aren't the greatest of run blockers, and I just did not think it would be a great matchup against the Buckeyes, and they got flat-out dominated. Could not move the ball at all. 49 yards rushing, and also the creativity in terms of play calling was no good. I was right, Nick. I expected a disastrous effort, and that's what we got, and then some.
It was a very poor showing against Ohio State, a really disastrous effort that really led to the wheels coming off for this Penn State team last year. This offensive line has some solid players, with Drew Shelton plugging in for Olu Fashanu, who was drafted. Some other players, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, are 2 players I like. This offense has to find a way to be better this year. They struggled against Ohio State. They struggled against some other teams as well. They did not have the greatest season. I know the stats are solid, right? 36.2 points per game is good. Nearly 400 yards per game is solid as well. But they have to find a way to step up and produce to compete in the new look Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that really ran up the score, though. I mean, Delaware for 63, UMass for another 63. Maryland, obviously a tough defense. They were able to put 51 on up, but I think the numbers are certainly a little bit skewed. Northwestern, they had 41 in. They really struggled. I think they only had 10 in that first half. And just to go back to the offensive line, Nick, there's a lot of young players I think will eventually make an impact. Do you see any of them making, consideration for the offensive starting 5 this year, or do you think we're going to have to wait another year before we see a lot of those high-level recruits get involved?
I think it's going to be another year of waiting. I think they're going to kind of rely on the guys that are a little more experienced here. Dawkins, a redshirt senior, Sal Wormley, a redshirt senior, Shelton, a junior. I think you're going to rely on your more veteran players in the trenches, but I do think some of these younger players are primed to step up potentially. If injuries show up, maybe they could beat out and be involved later in the season. Overall, I do think they're going to rely on more experienced offensive line, which I do think is the way to go in this conference.
The verdict here on this side of the ball. I felt last season, again, they would play tougher defenses and they would struggle, and they did mightily. They have great talent in essentially all areas minus wide receiver. Aller wasn't perfect, but the help around him at wide receiver and O-line didn't make his job any easier. I think we're going to see some respectable improvements in all of those areas while a great backfield remains intact. And obviously, Colin Nittany did a great job using a good backfield at Kansas to success. Better balance and more creativity seems in store, but the ceiling isn't extremely high for this offense. I think it's going to be a sound unit overall that can certainly win them football games. Look at the defensive side of the ball. Unit that's just continued to be staggering. First against the run, third in scoring defense. They returned 6 starters, lost only 5 guys in the portal, added 3, so not much turnover on that front. And it's going to start with an elite defensive line, Nick, led by Dennis Sutton at DN, an X5 star. Showed good power moves, showed the ability to bully offensive linemen. Nice quickness off the edge. Plays with such a great motor for being 6'5", 261. I just love his intensity. Great job of getting through creases once getting an angle advantage. Flat out obliterates tight ends. And they're going to move Abdul Carter down there with him. A guy who's been great at linebacker for them with a downhill trigger with instincts. Greatly redirects with fluid hips. Even in coverage, excels at sniffing out the run game. Slashes through the middle with great urgency. Such an aggressive weapon. Certainly, played reckless at times, though. Way more than he did as a freshman, with 16 missed tackles. He's going to move he's going to move to a 5-tech from being an inside linebacker. Do you think this is one of the nation's, it's obviously clearly one of the nation's best defensive end duos, but do you think Carter's going to make them the number 1?
I think Carter can certainly make them the number 1. He is such a talented player. And I think he could really step up and be an absolute home wrecker and a star for this team. 48 total tackles last year, 5.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, 5 pass breakups. I think Abdul Carter is a really incredibly strong and physical player that has the opportunity to be a dominant force on this defensive line. I think he really does excel. Really solid footwork, really solid speed as well. And I think Dennis Sutton next to him is another player that you got to highlight and look at as someone that could really be in prime to step up, right? 26 total tackles last year, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks for him. They got to replace Chopper Robinson. I think these two will step up and be those guys to replace those numbers and produce that production. This is a really solid duo coming off the edge.
It's a pretty deep edge rushing department as well. Eamon Vanover figures to be a respectable rotational piece this year. Zariah Fisher played a good bit and was quite good, especially versus the run. They both brought more heat than the numbers would suggest. Jamari Lyons has impressive explosiveness for being 6'5", 242. Good size and physicality as well. I think the interior defensive line is just as polished. Devon Ellis had a breakout season. He was great versus the run. Zane Durant was just as good in the run game department, was less stellar as a tackler in the hole, though. Senior reserves and Hakeem Beeman, Keziah Izzard both played extensive snaps. Gives Nittany Lions a dynamic group in the middle. 6'5", 319-pound Caleb Artis expected to see more time as well. This D-line is incredibly nasty, Nick. They have a good amount of depth here, plenty of size. Obviously, the skill speaks for itself, and there's a reason why they were phenomenal against the run last year that led to them taking home the number 1 ranking, and they were the only team in college football to not allow over 1,000 yards rushing at 982.
Incredible numbers against the run last year. Very, very strong numbers. Below 75 yards per game is incredible when you look at it. This is a unit that's, I think, is going to be just as strong this year with some solid players that you could plug in that could really step up. I think Fisher's an underrated player. 16 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss for him. Expect him to have a really solid season this year. I think he's going to be involved early on. Zane Durant, 17 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. Like to see him continue to improve those numbers and be involved. Keziah Izzard as well, 16 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. Decent numbers there. Overall, this is a unit that's really solid when you lead with Dennis Sutton and Carter. These are 2 incredible players, top players in college football. This is a very strong defensive line.
And obviously, they did allow 227 against Michigan, about 5 yards per carry there. Really got grinded down on against the Wolverines. Of course, the offense didn't do them any favors. They were just stuck on the field. But they completely forced Michigan to shut down their passing attack as the edge rushers were really getting to them over the edge. So, they had to shut down the passing attack completely. So this defense certainly made its presence felt. Look in the middle, I pondered how well, Kobe King would do this past season. Proved to be a great asset in the middle, thrived against the run, was polished in coverage. Veteran leadership presence should be big for this unit. Tony Rojas got on the field a good bit. As a high-end true freshman 4-star, nice length and speed. Needs to keep bulking up, but it's a nice downhill burst. He was pretty impressive in his brief appearances. He's now going to step into a full-time role. Dominic DeLuca figures to be the other starter. He was great in coverage. Thought he was pretty impressive against the run as well. But he'll be tested by Kavion Keys, Keon Wiley, and then also Tyler Elston. He's played a good bit in his 4 years at Penn State. Will provide good depth and experience. I think this linebacking core is certainly going to take another step, and they have no choice but to, Nick, with Carter moving to the defensive end role. They certainly don't want to be put in a position where he's forced back to playing the interior linebacking spot.
I think you want to avoid that at all costs. I think this is a unit that can potentially make that not be an issue. Kobe King returning 59 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks for King. I think he's a really good natural-born leader at middle linebacker. You move him around, he's a really solid player top to bottom. Dominic DeLuca, 29 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups, 2 picks for him, including a pick 6. Solid production out of him in the slot. I like what he can do. Really solid player top to bottom. Tony Rojas looked good, a younger player. As a true freshman, he looked solid. 22 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, plus a pick for him. Want to see what he looks like in year 2. Can he step up and develop into a better player overall for this team? I think this is a linebacking core that has some solid, hard-hitting players. I want to see how they continue to grow. I want to see what they can do with that limited experience. But overall, I do like what this unit looks like early on.
You look at the secondary, obviously, unit that loses some players to the NFL once again. And they're very good all year long. They had 4 interceptions against Illinois in week 3. The remaining part of the year, they really didn't get tested all that much. Maryland had some yards pretty much playing from behind the whole game. I thought they were very good against Ohio State. Indiana, that game was a bit sluggish from the secondary. They gave up almost 270 yards on 13 completions. They had a coverage bust in that one as well. And then against Ole Miss, they gave up 400 yards in the bowl game. That was mainly for a bunch of guys, their backups, where the corners just got toasted in the bowl game. Cam Miller wasn't good in that same game. Has good physicality. During the year was a quality backup. Landed a pair of transfers, though, in SEC rivals. 5-star A.J. Harris from Georgia only played in 5 games. An aggressive player who was more than willing against the run and a good press jam corner. Highly competitive player. Great fit here. Jalen Kimber from Florida, he struggled in the back half of the season, but there's plenty of snaps under his belt. Davion Collins has gotten some high praise from the staff. They also like Zion Tracy's upside. Cornerback group is in much better shape than it started the offseason in, I would say. You look at safety, Zakie Wheatley should really emerge this season as he steps into a full-time role. A lot of people are high on him. Dakari Nelson, a top 150 recruit from last year's class. And then Lamont Payne figured to be in the fold as well. Jalen Reed was a quiet member of this secondary. Should see him move to the slot in this new scheme under Tom Allen. Was a good player a season ago, mainly playing safety, though. An impressive bunch here that is led by Kevin Winston. He was flat-out elite in all areas, led the team in tackles, showed good covering skills, good ability to break on the ball, highly sound run defender and clean tackler, didn't miss one all year long. This is a great player here, and we gave high praise from these safeties all year long a season ago, Nick, and I think they're only going to progress and be better. Obviously, confidence was really shot, though, after that game against Ole Miss, where, again, the corners out wide were just getting completely toasted. I don't think that's going to be the precedent this year one bit. Obviously, with some backups playing against a tough opponent, that's going to happen in a bowl game. I don't think you're going to see that much in 24, though.
This is a unit that's really solid. Winston, your top returning tackler, 61 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 5 pass breakups. Good numbers there. I think he's a really solid player that continue to develop for this team. Jalen Reed, 46 total tackles, 2 picks, 4 tackles for loss, and a pass breakup. Devon Ellis, 26 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss. Cam Miller, 24 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. 3 pass breakups. Zakai Wheatley, really solid in coverage, 24 total tackles overall for him. I like this secondary unit to cap off this defense. This defense was really solid last year. They looked a little weak at times against the pass in the later part of the season, but still 7th overall in the nation. All 4 main stats for this defense was a top 10 unit, 13.5 points per game. A really strong defense that returns a lot of talented players.
Now you look at the verdict for the side of the ball. The Nittany Lions lose a few more to the pros, replace them with more future NFL players. This defense is elite from top to bottom. D-line's incredibly deep, while the linebacking group will need to replace Curtis Jacobs' departure and Carter moving to the edge. And, of course, the CBs will need to put the bowl game disappointment behind them. And this retooled secondary will need to earn their stripes. I think Harris, though, at corner is going to be great for them. What is the final prediction for the Nittany Lions? People can say whatever they want about James Franklin, being a poor game manager, inability to win big games, and I totally understand that, right? But at the same time, he's not getting the respect he deserves. He's a guy who puts players in the NFL, develops them into outstanding men at the same time. Franklin has created a mass amount of opportunities that, at a school that once seemed would be gone forever. Can't count on them to beat Ohio State. Everything that could go wrong against them over the last 7 years has happened. This is a great football team, Nick. Again, they do host the Buckeyes. 11 wins for me. They'll make the CFP, and we'll see what Franklin can do there. And again, though, Nick, this is a guy that's just not getting the respect he deserves for, resurrecting the school back from, again, what seemed like they were never going to recover from.
Penn State certainly found themselves in a very tough spot following scandal. No scholarships, basically, fan morale at the bottom of the barrel after having a really incredible run as one of the best programs historically in college football, a program that's won national championships, a program that's extremely relevant, especially in the Northeast, but particularly as well in the national scheme of things. I have them at 10-2. I think they're going to lose at West Virginia in week 1. That's my bold pick sort of the Big Ten that we're doing these previews. I do think West Virginia, who played them close for most of that game last year at home in front of a raucous crowd, will get the job done and catch Penn State sleeping a little bit. I think they'll lose to Ohio State as well. This is a very good Penn State team on paper, though, a really solid, really incredible defense and a solid offense. I do think that slow offense of start will catch them off guard against West Virginia, what I think will be a lower scoring game that the Mountaineers win. The spread in that game right now is about 10.5, so I think that's a very interesting look if you want to take a look at that. Overall, the schedule is pretty cut and dry, right? A little bit more interesting with a trip to USC and a trip to Wisconsin back-to-back, but I do think they will handle both of those games at Purdue and at Minnesota back-to-back at the tail end of the season. Could be interesting as well. This is a Penn State team that benefits greatly, from the expanded playoff. They always were kind of on the outside looking in the 4-team era. Now with their opportunity of expanded playoff, they should find themselves in the playoff every so often. They played well against Penn State in that loss, or against Ole Miss, that is, in that loss, in my opinion, in the Peach Bowl. Overall, this is a solid team with an incredible defense and a pretty good offense. I think the offense, though, is where your concern lies. I have them at 10 wins, you have them at 11 wins. I think they're a good bet to be in that double-digit win mark, which, again, is continuing to be impressive for James Franklin and company.
Yeah, I think the road games are certainly the most trickiest. WVU, Wisconsin, Minnesota, USC, those are all games that are pretty losable. So for them to be able to win those would be very tough. And so if people say they don't play a tough schedule, if this team was no good, they would lose those games. Again, yep, double-figure wins for both of us, CFP appearance. That's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. Penn State, always a fun team to talk about, and I'm hoping they can deliver on expectations this season of making the CFP.
It's a very interesting team, a very exciting team who have high expectations this year.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.